Hello, hello. Spencer Crest with the 2-5 hand that we played on Wednesday. Round of straddles here, so $10. I didn't raise into the gun, it was just round of straddles. Alright, several limpers. We get a raise to $55 in late position. Small blind calls, we call. You got to be sure in this spot. The limpers, we had no limp squeezing going on in this game. You got to be sure about that before you make this call. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but we're going to fast forward to the river action. We flop a pair, we check, everyone checks. Bets 110 into 335. We're calling, we get 3-1. Another caller behind us, otherwise folds. Turn 9 of hearts. Bringing in part of our backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw, all checks. River comes down to 6. We make 2 pair, and we're going to elect to check again here. Check to the pre-flop raiser, who ends up betting $410. Really quickly, let's go back to pre-flop. Had the 3 limpers, like I said. We're basically expecting with this game dynamic to always have these limpers call. Small blind is in front of us, pre-flop raiser in back of us. We're looking at a 6-way pot. We need 13.5% equity to be able to call here. The short end of it is that we are going to be able to continue with about 100% of our range. Really, if you want to fold the bottom 20%, that's like your that's like your 10-5s, your 9-2 suited, stuff like that. You can fold stuff like that. So whatever, 5-6 well within our capacity there. On the flop, we flop a pair. We're getting 3-1. Backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw, like we said already. We're going to continue here, so we do. And the standard action on the turn. So let's get to the river. We face a $410 bet. First thing to think about with this action is the player that is betting in this spot with 3 hearts on the board, is that person capable of checking back a flush? The reason for this, that it's a relatively big bet on the river, so it's going to be a little polarized. We want to be able to make sure that most of the top hands in their range are still available. So in this situation, our opponent was, so we move on to the next question. Our next question is our opponent capable of bluffing at a good frequency here? And in this situation, our opponent is, so we'll keep moving from there. The next question we should be asking ourselves is, where are we at in our range on the river here? And I'll let you guys think about that a little bit while we're going through the video. But we'll talk about it in a little bit. And I actually didn't do a very good job on it on this river. So, onto the decision-making process, as we have a decision. First things that I'm looking at here are bets, is bet sizing. It's a little on the big side, but I think it's reasonable and not really giving anything off. I looked at the guy a little bit, and he seemed relatively comfortable, which, doesn't really sway things anyway, I guess. But basically the short end of it is he's not giving us anything. He's not, telling us for sure that we need to call. Last thing that I thought about here was that our opponent had bet into 2 players, and that's kind of a big deal. When you have 2 players to act here, obviously there's a 7 that can make a straight. Queen Jack got there, sort of. It was 2 overs on the flop and had a gut shot. So that's, it should be a concern for him. And also, a lot of my hands from the small blind have improved at this point. So, with all that going into mind, you should think about what you would do on this river and what your thought process would be. With everything combined, and in particular with the fact that he bet into 2 people, I decided to go ahead and make a fold here. And let's see what happened. So we fold. Behind us, another player acts and folds. And our better shows us an ace high only with the ace of heart blocker. Okay. So it's always a good idea whenever this type of thing happens to do a recap as well, what happened. And just do some, some takeaways, some positives, some negatives. One of the first takeaways that that you have to acknowledge here is that we kind of got owned, not a great deal. So whatever, but that does happen. The next takeaway that I had here, there was a slight physical tell on this player. At one point during the hand, someone interacted with him somehow, and he said something like, "Oh, it's okay," and I didn't really pay that much attention to it at the time. But generally, this player is really, really stoic in these types of situations and never really cracks. And when I'm looking back at it next time, this really was like a strength equals weakness type deal. And I'll definitely look out for that in the future. A second tell that we should take away here is that his sizing was a little bit big. And next time we see a similar sizing, if we do see a bluff come from him, and we should pay attention to that, then we, in the future, should really, really consider that if he's betting a little bit bigger, that probably he's on the weaker side of his range. If he's betting smaller, let's say if you would have bet like in the 250, I think a lot of people with a nut flush here would have bet in the 250 range to try and get called, or maybe even 200. If we're seeing a lot of smaller bets from him, and he's showing up with the big hands, and then we're seeing a lot of like slightly bigger bets, and he's showing up with weaker hands, we should pay attention to that and be able to call him there. Last takeaway we should take here is to really consider our range next time. Now, what I mean by that is that in this hand, our action was to check and call, and then check again. Now, we should think a little bit about the types of hands that we show up with when we take that specific action. And I think really that 5-6 actually ends up being a lot higher on our range than I had anticipated, basically. And I'll tell here's what I mean by that. Now, occasionally when we check and call and then check and check again, we're going to have some nut flushes, right? It makes a lot of sense. We check call. We don't want to raise. We don't want to run people out, so we let people in. We check, looking to induce a bet. And then on the river, we actually do it again because then we can check raise on the river, right? It's a decent solid line and it makes a lot of sense. Other than that, most of our smaller flushes, we're going to have to bet the river because we want value. Most of our straights, we're going to have to bet the river because we want value at that point too. And, most of our sets, we've already turned in either check raise the flop or we bet at some point, it probably bet, either check raise the flop or bet the river. And maybe we have some sets. The point is that, two pairs actually end up being a lot of our check call range here. So we can't really afford to just check and fold them since they're so far at the top of our range very often. So I think in the future I'll think about that a little bit more and try and protect that portion of our range. Basically, when we're checking on the river, if we're folding two pairs, what I'm saying is that we are we're allowing our opponent to get away with murder with bluffing there. So that was ultra smooth. It's like the smoothest sentence I've ever had. Anyway, guys, I'm going to end it on that note, I guess. And since we ended it so smoothly, if you like this video, then like and subscribe. Have a great weekend. Go crush. See you. Bye.